Hi everybody, this is Matt Martin with Vehement Knives. Somebody very dear to me just purchased one of these. This is a Springfield Armory 1911 A1. This is the loaded model as they call it. It's got the front serrations, back serrations, skeletonized adjustable trigger, delta hammer, extended beaver tail safety, adjustable sights. These guys were some of the first to lower the ejection port as a standard feature instead of taking it to a gunsmith. Inside also, it's what some of the old timers would call throated and polished, meaning that the breech inside there is widened and the feed ramp is polished and a good healthy width also to help with feed. Today we're going to go over disassembly or field stripping of this weapon. So anybody who got these are a little bit different than the original A1s with the full-length guide rod, and they do take a special tool, pretty much just a Allen wrench, to take out this full-length guide rod. So let's get started. We're going to make sure that everything's unloaded. For you people who aren't necessarily gun people, it's always best to hand somebody a weapon with the action locked back like this. This slide release is what locks it back. You'll be able to see that there's a notch there that catches on. And then check the breech. Obviously make sure that there's no magazine in the magazine well. And you can see, I know it's kind of dark on there, but you can see there's nothing inside. And so now that we're clear, we're going to let the slide go forward gently. There's nothing in there to give it any resistance, so I don't, on other people's firearms, I don't like letting it ride, so to speak, very hard up. It's just kind of tough on the weapon. So up here at the muzzle end, a little unnerving looking at the business end of these things. It's a big bore. You can see the full-length guide rod below the barrel, and between the two is a barrel bushing. So we're going to start off, let me get in center frame here so you guys can see this also. Taking your Allen wrench, inserting it into the guide rod, giving it a little bit of power to turn it counterclockwise. So everybody can see, counterclockwise. Until you feel it get nice and loose, and then safely pull it straight out. I'm going to set that on the mat around there. Now this part on some of the standard ones is a little bit different also. It's a little easier to push this in to be able to rotate that barrel bushing, but in this case we're going to use the edge of our Allen wrench. You can also use a coin or a key or something of non-marring qualities to kind of push that down and rotate the barrel bushing clockwise. And then this is the dangerous part, is just very easily maintaining pressure, and I know my hands are covering it, but I have no choice. Maintain pressure because that recoil spring plug wants to fly out under the pressure of that spring. This piece is actually a separate piece and comes off, so you want to be real careful when you're rotating that bushing and letting it, otherwise it could potentially either fly across the room or more harmfully hit you in the eyeball. So now that we have that done, we're going to go back to the slide, and you'll notice that there are two notches. One is to catch the slide as it goes back, the other one is for disassembly. It's going to be the smaller one of the two. With your finger pressed against what looks like a button on the opposite side of the slide catch, you're going to slide the slide back until that lines up with that notch, and you're just going to, you can see the gap starting to form now. You're just going to push that out and remove it. There's the piece. Set that on the mat. Take the whole slide, slide it off the frame. Now you're left with your frame, and inside you can see your ejector. You can see a little bit more of your hammer. There's your feed ramp. Obviously make sure that everything's nice and clean, maybe a thin coat of oil, no major fouling, no bent pieces, nothing to speak of. Everything looks pretty shipshape. I'm pretty familiar with this weapon, so I know it's in decent shape. Back to the slide. With the slide held upside down so that you can see the recoil spring, the guide rod, this is your barrel link, this is the section that rides over your ejector rather, and then obviously here's where your firing pin goes in. We're not going to get that far into it. We're just going to do a basic field strip for cleaning and maintenance. We're going to rotate the barrel bushing, pull out the recoil spring. We're going to rotate the barrel bushing just under 180 degrees counterclockwise, and there's a little lug in there that will pop out when you get it lined up. I'll show that to you in detail here in a second. So that slides, comes out, and there's the lug. You can see it I'll point with this. You can see it right there. That lines up with this channel right here, and that's what allows it to come out. Now you're free to take the barrel out. The barrel comes out. There's your link, your barrel link. Obviously check the bore of the weapon to make sure that there's no fouling or nothing jammed in there or lodged in, a lifesaver or lint or powder fouling or anything like. Nice throated breech right there, helps with the feed. On these also you'll see this notch. Let me get that back in frame. You'll see this little notch right there. That's a loaded chamber indicator, which is pretty common on a lot of modern 1911s. If there were a cartridge loaded into the breech there, you'd be able to see just the slightest amount of brass rim when it's in full battery. So as it sits like that, through that little window is where you'd be able to see the brass rim of a cartridge, telling you that the thing is hot. It does have a bullet and it's loaded. And so there you have it. There it's broken down into its basic parts. We don't need to go much further than this, if at all, when field stripping the weapon. And I have the frame down here. It's best, I don't advise it. It just may be old-timer syndrome, I guess, but I don't advise dry firing the weapon when it's in this condition. It has no spring resistance, and it just puts a lot of stress on the frame itself, which is something you don't want to have repaired. So I don't recommend to anybody pulling the trigger at this state. In fact, sometimes it's just enough to throw the safety on lightly. You don't have to over torque it because it will spin in this condition. So just throw the safety on and let it be. That way there's no accidental. But there's your parts. So we have the slide assembly, the barrel bushing, recoil spring plug, slide release. Let me get that slide release. There's the segment on specific to the Springfield 1911 A1 load. This is your recoil spring. This is your guide rod, your full length guide rod. There's your recoil spring and standard length guide rod in there, and this one has a little Delrin recoil buffer on it. Nothing too fancy, pretty basic. And let's go through reassembly. So it's everything pretty much in reverse. You're going to take your barrel with the link facing up as it sits here. That's going to slide through, and you'll feel it kind of drop in. Next, you're going to take your barrel bushing, locate that lug, drop it down through the channel, and then slide it just under 180 degrees back that way. And basically that just keeps everything in place, keeps it from falling out. Your recoil spring will get fed through from the backside out the front. And if somebody has a recommendation on this just has always worked for me. I always throw the link forward and then slide the recoil spring guide rod. I slide that back into it and kind of keeps it set, and you'll see why in just a minute. It makes life, for me anyways, a little bit easier on reassembly. Now there's some channels in the back here. It's hard to see on the camera, but there's some channels in the back that ride these rails on the frame, and I'm holding it so you can see the contrast in the light. So you're going to set it in this fashion, and it should just line up and slide forward. At this point, I like to flip it over, drop that safety down, and just gently slide it back, just like that. Now we're going to come back to this side. We're going to get that pretty closely lined up for how this has to drop in. Now your slide catch or slide release. This one's even trickier to see. Inside of this hole is the link, and so sometimes you need to get a decent light behind it, and you'll be able to see that link line up with that hole. It's imperative that this pin passes through both sides of the frame and that link. It'll take a little feeling around until you become proficient at the 1911. Now, for whatever reason, this particular one has got a pretty tough spring right here, this little detent, and it needs to be overcome with something. It can be, again, a key, the tip of a pocket knife, in this case a ballpoint pen, and we just need to overcome that spring a little bit so we can get this slide release where it needs to be. Now we got that to pop in. Let's line up that notch just right, and this should slide right in. Now the slide moves forward. We're going to go back to what we said earlier was probably the most dangerous part, save having a bullet in the chamber, of this whole operation, and put that recoil spring plug back in using a little bit of arse. We're going to push that down, and while doing that, rotate the barrel bushing. Rotate that till it pops. You'll see where it locks in. And now we're back to our recoil spring guide rod. That takes a little bit of finesse to work it past the spring. It's definitely not brain surgery. You just got to kind of jiggle it a little bit and it'll fall in. Go back to your Allen wrench, snug it down. I don't recommend putting so much force into this that you strip out the facing for this hex driver. And so just put it in and give it the old third elbow click. Just torque it down a little bit, enough that it's not going to come loose upon firing. Check your weapon for the action. Dry fire. And that's it. Thank you very much for watching.